All right, welcome to Defense Diaries. I'm your host, Bob Mata, and this is the People versus Richard Allen, day 5. So another day, the trial. It was another exciting day, action-packed. Only 3 witnesses, but a lot of information came out. Kind of the 10,000-foot view from high up in the sky. Essentially, we had Sarah Carbaugh, eyewitness. She is another one of the eyewitnesses that wasn't on the trail that day, but is an eyewitness who believes that she saw a bridge guy walking on 300 North, which again is that county road that runs north of the trail system. And she was very interesting, to say the least. Her testimony was unlike any that I've ever seen, just in terms of her demeanor. She would have been appointment television. She would have gone viral on the socials because it was so bizarre. Her personality was really, really hard for me to try to pinpoint what was so strange to me about her, but it just was. Um, Secondly, we then had uh, the forensic pathologist come on, and he, of course, went through the autopsies. It was obviously devastating. They had and it's clinical. Autopsies are clinical. It's a different vibe than the vibe you get when you're looking at the crime scene photos, where you have somebody that is or 2 people that are in the surroundings where the crime happened. It's like you feel a different way, whereas you're looking at the autopsy photographs, you still feel the heartache, but it's easier to look at because you're trying to understand the science behind it while the forensic pathologist is testifying. If that makes sense. I'm not good with blood. Like, it's always been a thing with me. It's like since childhood. I'm like, I get queasy. So, when I've had cases where I have, had gruesome crime scenes that were a part of the case, it's always been challenging for me, but, I have to suck it up and do it. And finally, we had Chris Cecil, who is the digital forensic guy that took over in 2019. He is the gentleman who I saw testify earlier this year in late July, early August during the 3 days of hearings. He didn't get any better. He's still, in my estimation, not a very good witness in terms of the state. Uh, and that's just objectively. Like, he's just not a very learned man in the ways of digital forensics. That's just my honest evaluation of him. He is not somebody that I would quantify as a powerful witness for the state. And kind of the only like, and I'm just going to tell you guys, I'm doing Vinny tonight at 9:30. I know I'm going up against Andrea, and I'm probably going up against Lee. I don't care. I can't go until midnight again tonight. This is going to force me to keep this thing short. Allie has got something else to do tonight, so she's not going to be with us. It's just going to be me. I'm going to power through. I'm going to try to give you guys all the deets that I can. I'm going to try to answer some questions if I can get through the testimony real quickly. And then I'm going to bounce. And then I'm on Vinny at 9:30. You guys come check that out. I don't know who I'm on with. That's always interesting. It's always like a nice surprise to find out who I am, who I'm on. And we always have replay crew. So, I'm sure that we're going to have folks that are over with Andrea and Lee that'll come and watch on the replay, which is good. I'm cool with it. I'm good with it. Tomorrow, I'm going to be the first on, though. I'm going to tell you that. I'm going to get my ass here and on the stream before anybody else because I want to. I'm tired of doing it late. I want to try to get on early. I don't know if tomorrow will be the day where we're going to kind of split it up between Allie and I. The first day we're going to do that, where I give her my notes. She comes live early, gets all the information out before anybody, and then I'll come back and I'll clean it up at night with whatever happened in the afternoon. But I don't know if that'll be tomorrow, but I'm going to be on early. That's for certain. So I'm going to jump right into it. let's get into Sarah Carbaugh. She was just in terms of kind of like the courtroom demeanor again. Rick Allen was very talkative. As I said, he is very much engaged in this trial. Like there is none of the tranquilizer guy staring up at the ceiling guy. Like he's talking with his lawyers. He looks like he's all there mentally to me. I'm not seeing any like, and I'm not watching anybody else's content, so y'all have to tell me because I know you guys are digging in all over the place, which I encourage. Get the views from all of us. We all have different perspectives on things, and that includes even defense attorneys. So Andrea and Lee look at things differently than I do, and vice versa. So I think it's healthy and good for you guys to get all the deets from everybody, because we're all going to make different observations. The reality is that all of us are sitting in there just trying to write every single word down. So like we're trying to act as court reporters. We're really trying to kind of make transcripts so that we can just relay what we're hearing, leaving kind of a lot of analysis out, just in general. But I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, that you're gonna get a pretty good idea of what's going on in that courtroom. McClellan had on a nice, I think it was gray suit, black shirt, pink tie. I like the look a lot. Thought he looked sharp. Rosie always looks good. He's always got, I think he had a navy blue suit on. Andy, I think it was in the Brown family. He looked sharp as well. I started to think Andy got a haircut. I was going to ask him, but I think he has other things to worry about than answering my grooming questions. But and you guys let me know. And I know I was doing the spaces, the audio tweets today. I know that the second one got cut off. I've got 3 bars outside of the courthouse. It is what it is with that. So I am going to really do my best with those because I like those. I like being able to tell you guys because I'm able to impart more information in short spaces than I am trying to run out there, grab my phone, tweet real quick, turn my phone off, throw it in the box, and run back upstairs. It's like I have a very short period of time to do all that stuff in. So I figured that those spaces will be kind of a cool way to give you guys that are following me on Twitter over at defense_diaries, which you should be, to give you guys kind of early updates on what's popping. All right, so let's dig into it. My finger, I cannot feel my index. I officially cannot feel my index finger at all from writing and this is the 5th day of trial and I skipped one. Allie was there Saturday. So I think the whining will probably intensify. I'm not having to whine about having to go through the nightmare of standing in line. So I'm cognizant of that. I am cognizant of that. But I kind of got that because I earned it. I've been covering the spoots on the ground since the arrest. So I don't feel bad about it. I feel like I earned that right to be in there through our coverage and what we do and what we say. So it is what it is. All right. So let's go. Day 5. Initially, when they come in, they publish Mullins. So the first thing that happens is McClellan says, we want to publish, which publish means that they're handing exhibits that they've printed out for the jury to the jury. Okay. So the Mullins had a few exhibits, 213, 214, and 219 that he had talked about the vehicles that were caught from the Hoosier Harvest store of the vehicles. So that's where we were talking about Betsy Blair's vehicle, one shot of Kelsey's vehicle, and then a few shots of Betsy Blair's vehicle. And then also they put in from Officer Page, or I think he's Deputy Page. I don't know what rank he is at this point. He's 3 days ago. He's a distant memory, but 18, 19, and 20 were all entered into evidence and published to the jury today. And those were the diagrams of the crime scene. So they call their first witness, who is Sarah Carbaugh. If you are familiar with the probable cause affidavit in this case, that name should ring a bell. She is the muddy and bloody woman. She is the person who claimed that as she was driving down 300 North for like the 7th time that day, that she drove past a man at around just shy of 4 o'clock that she says was muddy from head to toe and bloody, and that he had blood towards the bottom of his jeans, closer to his shoes, and that she claimed that she got a pretty decent look at him. And so, she was one of the witnesses they used to get Richard Allen under arrest. Um, Also, that like I'm gonna really be trying to cram a couple things, and I know how I tangent sometimes, y'all. But if you guys haven't heard, Tobin, the metallurgy guy, he's out. Gull denied it. He's not allowed to testify. Shocked, but not shocked. It's a bad ruling. It's a insane ruling. One of these days, all these motions that are getting filed, I'm going to do a live on those, because we're not hearing about them as the trial's proceeding. Like I'm finding out about them probably after you guys are, in terms of rulings. So uh yeah, I'm just like, anything that's happening that's not being mentioned in court, all of us in court are behind in time in terms of what's happening in terms of rulings, because she's not coming out and saying, okay, I ruled on your motion. I don't know if you guys heard it. That may happen back in chambers. I don't think so, because every day when I get in there, the lawyers are all milling about in the well of the court, getting ready, getting their exhibits ready, looking through notes, just getting prepared for the day. So but that was a big ruling. Andrea's motion was also denied. I was frankly surprised she ruled on it. My guess is she wasn't going to touch it, but she just denied it without hearing, which Andrea and I both knew that was going to happen. But a record was made, so that's good. All right, so Sarah Carbaugh gets on the stand. She is a Delphi resident. She has lived in Delphi her whole life, and she lives very close to the trails. And her general habit is that she goes to the trails almost every day with her dogs to walk. That particular day, she did not go to the trails though, because originally she had testified. She's like, "Yeah, I'm out there daily," and then Diener was the one directing her. She said, "Is it every day or?" And then she got the hint, and she's like, "Oh, almost every day, nearly daily." And so uh, on this particular day, she did not go out to the trails, and but she did. She said it was a nice day, very nice. It was a mild day for February. It was. She said it was 47 degrees. I think she said it was 47 degrees, or maybe 51. I have it somewhere in here. Point being that they're all giving different degrees of what the temperature was, varying from like 41 up to 55. I've heard by all the different testimony. And she said it was a like just a nice day for early February, which we've heard. Betsy Blair was the one who's a little bit older. She's like, yeah, I thought it was a little chilly out, which in reality it is. I mean, like, we're not wearing shorts and a t-shirt when it's like, in the 40s. But for early February, just coming out of winter, that's like the first kind of like, oh, pretty decent out, let's get out. Let's go do something. So she typically enters through the Mears entrance, and you guys should know what that is at this point. Remember, you can enter over Freedom Bridge, where you come in, you go right on the trails. That leads you right into the trails. That was the path that I took on Thursday last week when I went and walked it. You also have the Mears entrance, which is off of 300, and you've got the old Mears Farm on the north side of 300, and on the south side, you have what they have called the Mears entrance. And Sarah actually gave a little bit of a history. She's like, oh, that was land that wasn't being used, and it was donated by the Mears family, so that's why they call it the Mears entrance. And she started, my first impressions from her about her were that she seemed almost rehearsed in the first 10 minutes. Like she had practiced what she was going to say, what her demeanor was going to be like. And it seemed like she had it down pat. Like she was very polished in the beginning. Like much more than the other eyewitnesses, who just seemed like people that were testifying in a trial that were nervous. She didn't strike me as nervous. She seemed the opposite of nervous, which was surprising with some of the things that she talked about with regard to herself, kind of trying to explain why her memory may have been spotty about certain things. So at any rate, um, she said on that particular day, uh, and they always ask these witnesses if they ever walked across the high bridge. And she said, when I was 16, I did. It's like now that I'm an adult, it's terrifying. I would never do it. Which I agree with. I was like I said last night, I was thinking about going across at some point. I'm like, that seems horrifying. And why? And then she did not know the girl. She was not familiar with Abby or Libby. She was alerted to the fact that they went missing because she got an Amber Alert on the 13th. She did not walk the trails that day. She did happen to drive by the entrance 3 or 4 times that day. She was just driving around town, enjoying the people out that were enjoying the nice day. All the people that came out of their hidey holes to enjoy an early spring slash late winter mild day. Uh, she said that she saw vehicles in the lot all day. And we're talking about old CPS, that lot. She said there were cars there all day. So the trails were active. Yeah, I think at this point we know that throughout the course of the day there were approximately 70 people out there throughout, from morning until kind of the search goes on, not including the searchers. So she says that around 4 o'clock, it was actually 3:56, that she noticed 4 people standing near the mirror's entrance. Now, I thought this testimony was strange. And like I always wonder, when you have a trial, especially when it's 7 years after the fact, how much has changed in their minds, how much confirmation bias is going on, how much have they consumed of the massive publicity that's been surrounding this case over the time. And it's hard to know. But she says that she sees these 4 people. And she says that one of them she doesn't identify if it's the 4 girls that we know exist, which is Rayleigh and Brianne and Rayleigh's 2 sisters. But I have a feeling that it was not, because they would have been long gone at that point. We know that they were gone by, depends on who you ask, but they were gone pretty early, like a couple hours before she would have been driving by. But she said that one of them had bright blonde hair with kind of like a pink streak, is how she described it. And then shortly after that, while driving, and she claims that she was going about 35 miles an hour, she says she saw a man covered in mud and blood. Now, remember, this is on direct. Okay. What do you mean there was no Amber Alert, Greeny? Is that true? Is that true? That would be interesting, because she 100% said that she got an Amber Alert. So that would be interesting to know. They released her from her subpoena, so there's no calling her back. That would have been nice if somebody on the defense would have known that there wasn't an Amber Alert, to be able to nail her on that. So she says she sees this man covered in mud and blood, walking on the side of the road. Okay, so just know that there is no sidewalk on either side of 300 North. Okay, it's a country road, so you basically have gravel on either side, and it's a 2-lane highway or country road. And she claims that he's walking west towards town. He's walking in the opposite direction of her path of travel. And then she claims that she looked at him, but that they did not make eye contact. She said she did not recognize the man as somebody that she had seen around town. And it always surprises me, because so she doesn't have this guy wearing a face covering, right? Um, Rick Allen has worked at the CVS in this town that is very small. I mean, the CVS is like the only pharmacy you've got. It's probably like the biggest retail store in town, maybe save for like a Dollar General on the outskirts. But like in terms of around, the main square, which by the way, there are some amazing restaurants in Delphi. Like every meal I've had here has been really good for lunch. But I digress. So she claims she looks at him. He did not make eye contact. Eye contact. She did not recognize the man. She did not know at that point that the girls were missing. When she gets home, she learned the girls were missing. At some point, Then Diener shows her the big blow up, the bridge guy pic, and she asks that question. She's asked all the eyewitnesses. She says, "Do you recognize that image as the person that everyone calls bridge guy?" And she says, "Yes, I do." And she says that that is the man that I saw walking on the road that day, and that he was covered with mud and blood. And uh, she also, so she goes into a little more detail. She says that the way that I would describe it is that he had a sketchy walk. And this is where she starts getting like, I'm like, wow, this witness is next level. She's like, may I get down on the may I get down from the stand and demonstrate how I saw him walking? She doesn't even like it. And like Diener's like, yeah, but hold on, wait a second, we'll get there. So she's like got this whole plan. Like you can tell she's been working through this testimony in her head. You can just tell when somebody's ready to go. You know, she's raring to go. She's raring to testify. So Diener then asked the question of, "Can you describe what he looked like?" And she said he was covered with mud and blood. And then she does get down off the stand, and she says it was like a sketchy walk, is how she described it. She said that he had his hands jammed in his pockets, and his shoulders were kind of in, and then he was looking down. I mean, that's like I don't know how you guys walk. Like I'm not a guy who walks with my head up. Like I'm often thinking, like when I'm walking the dog, I have my headphones on and I'm typically like deep in thought or I'm listening and I'm like looking at the ground, but for when my dog rips my arm out of my, socket because he's chasing a squirrel, and it's like I'm not paying attention. But like I don't necessarily consider that sketchy. She said, well, normal people walk around and everybody's making eye contact with every person they pass. I'm like, no, they're not. I'm like, I feel like a weirdo if I'm like making eye contact with every person. I'm like, people don't do that anymore. Like, and I'm sure that there's some truth to that. Like, the smaller the town you get, probably the more common that is. I mean, especially in a smaller town where you're going to know a lot of people, right? It's probably, I'm trying to think of when I'm walking around here. Maybe I do keep my head up a little more. I am like I feel like I say hi to more people when I'm in Delphi. I'm not gonna. So maybe I retract that whole statement. Maybe that's accurate. I'm very friendly when I'm down here. I'm saying hi to all the deputies when I come into the courthouse. They know us at this point. Like all the people at the restaurants know us. So I'm always trying to be very pleasant. I want them to have a good impression of me, that I'm a kind and decent person. Um, so she gets back on the stand after her little performance there, and she goes on to describe a little bit what she saw. She said, so his upper torso was just saturated in mud, incredibly muddy, that his jeans were also muddy, but then down around like the shins going down to the ankles. She first said on the stand that it looked like there was blood spots, which we would probably refer to in our game as blood spatter. um, she claims that she did not watch as she's driving past 35 miles an hour. Okay. And she claims that she did not view him in the rearview mirror. So now she testifies, and you guys tell me in the chat how off she is with her time. She claims that she doesn't contact law enforcement for 3 weeks. Now, I've heard that she didn't contact law enforcement until July. So I don't know. It's like, I don't know. Like that's a huge gap in time. Either way, even 3 weeks when they're putting it out on blast, if you were down out and around the trail that day and you think that you have information that can help the investigation reach out to us, she waits at least 3 weeks. And I've heard that it's more. So, and as a matter of fact, on redirect, I think it was a Freudian slip by Diener, because Diener said 3 months. So I don't know if that was the reality coming out accidentally by Diener and she Freudian slipped it, or if it was just a slip of the tongue. I mean, so if anybody knows, like it's Sleuthy's probably hanging around somewhere else in the live that started already. She could be over at Tees. She's a mod over there. Like Sleuthy would know the answer. But so let's check that with a red flag right there. Okay. Um, So then she finally goes. She talks to an officer. She sees an officer standing by the mirror's entrance, waiting for people, like hoping that people will come, that are walking in the trails. He's asking, "Hey, were you out here on the trails on the 13th?" And so they're still trying to gather tips, get information. She then says that she sees him. She feels that that was an act of God, that this guy was stationed there. So that spurs her on to give her account of what she saw that day. So at that point, Diener shifts. She says, "Okay, you've seen the HHS, the Hoosier Hardware or Hoosier Harvest soft, Hoosier Hardware store. Oh my God, I'm never going to say that name. Hoosier Harvest store video, correct?" She says, "Yes." "And you saw the still, correct?" "Yes." "And that was in fact your vehicle, correct?" So we heard about that during Mullen's late testimony yesterday with the stills of the cars. That was in fact, she verifies that that was indeed her car that we saw at 3:56 driving down the road. So she recognized it as her vehicle, and that is EV 219. So they then publish that to the jury and say, "Look, that's her car right there. There's proof she was there. She's telling the truth about that part." Oh, what's up, LA? Okay, so she's done. Now, like I've told you, she's done with direct. The state has been very, very quick with these witnesses, and they do it because they're trying to limit the amount that they're getting out on direct because of that certain objection that we had yesterday, which is beyond the scope. Now, beyond the scope is where you have a defense attorney or the state, depending on who did direct, asking questions that were not brought up during the direct examination. If they go into an area that was not covered during the direct examination, you as an attorney can say, "Hey, judge, I'm going to object here. It's beyond the scope of the direct. They can't get into it. We didn't talk about it, so they can't talk about it." Because you're only allowed to cross examine as to instances or issues that they've raised or facts. So they kept it brief with all four of the eyewitnesses. Baldwin gets up, does the cross. It gets heated right away. And Baldwin, I keep telling it to you, it's very difficult to get him riled in terms of a witness. Now, we haven't had any witnesses on the stand that have even come close to getting him riled. This was the first one, and he maintained his cool, and she was like combative is the way that I would phrase it. So he goes in on her right away. First thing he asks is, "You used mud first the first like several times when you first spoke with law enforcement. Isn't that correct?" And he said, Actually, you used the word mud 11 times in your first interview, correct?" And he said, "Yeah." Uh, and she's like, "But I'm pretty sure I said blood." And he's like, "Okay, well, I'm going to show you, do you need me to refresh your recollection? Because have you seen the transcript?" And she says, "Well, maybe, I don't know." And he's like, "All right, well, I'm gonna see. Do you want me to refresh your recollection as to whether or not you said blood the first time that you spoke with them?" It's like, "I don't know." So he brings it up to her. She reads it, and she says, "Yeah, I do not state blood in that first interview." And then Andy asks her, "So no one told you not to say blood during that interview, right? Like you weren't directed by law enforcement not to say blood, right?" She says, "No, I wasn't directed to do that." So he says, "A couple of weeks later, uh, you interview again with law enforcement, and that time you say mud 13 times." And she's like, and you didn't say blood. So you say mud a bunch of times, but you're still not claiming that you saw blood." And she's like, "Well, I don't know. That's not right." And he's like, "Okay, so can I refresh your recollection again?" So he goes up, brings her the transcript again. She takes a long time to read through it. And she says, "I do not see the word blood in there, but I'm going to tell you right now that I think that they lost an hour of my video interview, or maybe an hour and a half." So I was like, "Whoa, wait, they lost an hour and a half of her videotaped interview?" And she's like, "And it's during the part that they lost that I said blood. And so Baldwin's like, okay, I mean, I guess we believe you. It's like, so she then interviews a third time, March 20th, 2 years later. And again, she doesn't say, uh, this time she doesn't say muddy. She just says bloody. She skips the whole muddy part. And remember, her testimony was that this guy was like super muddy. So she at this point, she's just switched completely over to he's bloody. And she gets really combative at this point. She says, that's no, wrong. Like that's not correct. I said both. He says, no, you didn't. He's like, would it help you to read the transcript to refresh your recollection? And she says, no, it wouldn't. I don't want to read the transcript. Like it was crazy. It was unbelievable. And like Gull's just kind of like sitting there watching this all happen. And like Baldwin looks at the judge. He's like, Judge, are you gonna direct her to allow me to try to refresh her recollection? Gull doesn't say anything. And so he's like, okay, all right, whatever. So like, and at that point, if you're sitting there as a juror and you're watching her act this way, like you have to think that there's something off. Like there's to me, it just destroyed her credibility. I thought that she had no credibility moving forward during that. And I didn't understand her motivation for doing that. It's like, is she trying to inject herself in the case in a way that she need not do? Is she, does she feel that she's a critical witness and that she's helping secure the conviction of Richard? I don't know. But she was very friendly with the state, which is not unusual when you have state witnesses, and then they get defensive when the defense attorneys start questioning. But it was it was off-putting. I would love to know what the jurors thought of her. I mean, I was talking to everyone behind me, including Andrea. I was like, so she was a lot, right? She was like, man, she was a lot. So uh she then says to Andy, she's like, are you trying to trick me? And he says, I assure you, ma'am, I am not trying to trick you. And she has been the loudest witness in terms of every witness has been on the stand. Everyone that's testified is like craning my neck, turning my ear towards what they're saying, cupping it. Like I'm just shy of rolling up a piece of paper and like sticking it out of my ear because I don't care what it looks like, so I can hear. And this witness, I had no problem hearing. She was full throat. She was definitely using her best outdoor voice, as they like to say in the courtroom. So, and she says, "quote My description has always been the same: muddy and bloody, muddy and bloody, muddy and bloody." So she happened to have said the word blood 16 times in her third interview, and she made the quote that it looked like a hog had been slaughtered. And then she starts like she had this habit of looking over to the jury and just starts chatting with them. She's like, I don't really know what it looks like to like when a hog gets slaughtered. I don't know why I said that. It's just completely inappropriate things for a witness to be doing. It was so weird. It really was. Um, at that point, when she gave a description, when she was going back to her original description of muddy and bloody, she's like, I thought he might have fallen off the trail or the bridge and just fell in the mud. I mean, he was that covered in mud. And then she goes on to describe what she saw. She said that initially, she said he was wearing a tan jacket, not a blue jacket. And then after 2 years, during her third interview, she changed it to a blue jacket. Okay. And then Andy asked her, he's like, did the photo of the bridge guy have an impact on your memory? She's like, what? What do you mean? I don't understand what you're saying. Did the photo of the bridge guy that you saw hundreds of times have an impact on your memory? And she's like, I don't know. She's like, I don't want to like, and then he goes into this thing where I think it was the second interview, that she had specifically told the cops, I don't want you to put a picture in front of me because I don't want my memory to be contaminated. Okay. And she knew that the photo was everywhere. Yet the officer showed her a photo and then kept it in front of her during the entire interview. And he asked, "Is that why your story changed?" And she says, "No, I think it was probably anxiety. Like this whole thing has been like a nightmare for me. I've been incredibly anxious. I just wanted to come in here and testify and have this thing be over." So she then goes on to testify that she saw kind of a brown sweater or sweatshirt under the now blue coat, the formerly tan coat, and that he had curls in his hair that were poking out from his hood because he said his hood was up. Next came a very demonstrative, emphatic back and forth where Baldwin quotes her transcript where she said that he had very the person she saw had very effeminate eyes. And she said, "I never said that. I never said he had like," and she used the wrong word. She said, "I never said he had romantic eyes." And and Andy says, "No, very effeminate eyes." He's like, "Can I refresh your recollection? Can I show you?" She's like, "No, no, you can't. I do not want you to refresh." She's like, "We're gonna do this again. We're gonna do this again." Andy's like, "All right, okay." Never just so she refuses to review the transcript. I've never seen anything like it, and I've never seen anything like it wherein the judge hasn't kind of intervened and said, "Ma'am, okay, you have to relax a little bit. And if the attorney asks you if you want to refresh your recollection by reading your words, you should do that. And it may not refresh your recollection because refreshing your recollection doesn't mean that you read something and then now you're repeating what you read. You're reading it to see if it actually jars your memory. So there's a distinction there. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but you're supposed to be reading it and in your mind it jars your memory like, "Oh, all right, yeah, I do remember saying that now." So yeah, and I'm like, I'm gonna go, I'm 98% that she said the word romantic eyes. Like double check if you guys are gonna check Andrea and Lee, see if like they heard romantic eyes when she came back and Andy was saying effeminate eyes. So refuses the transcript. Andy moves on, and yeah, it's like your phone pinged off the tower that day, right? And they got your phone number, right? They were able to get your phone number. She's like, "Yeah, well, they were pinging everybody's phone in town." And he's like, "Well, how do you know that?" She's like, "Well, my parents they pinged their phone too, so like everybody was being pinged. They were trying to figure out whose phones were what." So she then says, "What did I say?" Because I see here, did I say romantic? Is that what I said? Because in my notes, I see on the margin, I wrote romantic eyes. Is that what I said? I can't remember. All right. So this is where she testifies that she's driving down the road. Remember, she says she's driving down the road 35 miles an hour. Okay, which is pretty brisk. And then she claims that she sees him for 30 seconds. And Baldwin's like, "So 30 seconds, you mean from beginning until you pass him? Because you already testified that you didn't look at him in your rear view mirror." And I don't know. I don't know what kind of car she drives. I don't remember her testifying to the make and model. So she says she sees him for 30 seconds and she would describe him. And she's like, "Look," she's like, "I know what I saw. And I saw a white man in his 30s, 40s, or 50s. That's what I saw." And he's like, "Okay, I'm good." He sits down. Diener gets up for the redirect. She goes into the hoodie, the tan sweater, and she saw a tan hood. And that there, she asked her about the hat because she hadn't said anything about the hat yet. And she says, "Yes, yes, there was a hat. And it was a very strange hat. It was a strange hat." She's like, and then this is one of the times where she looks over the jury. She's like, "Really, any hat that's not a baseball hat, I think is a strange hat. So, this hat was a very strange hat." And I'm just like, "What the wow, this like I've never seen anything." Like she's like, she's like, it was kind of like, and she made this weird statement that she was trying to figure out what type of hat it was on, I think on the internet. And she said it was like kind of like for her, it was like a Tinder profile, except with hats, trying to go through all the hats there were. And she said that all she knows is that it had kind of like a bill, and that she was able to see the bottom of his ears. So he has a hood up, yet she's going 35 miles an hour. No, no, when she's looking for the hat online, she said it reminded her of going through Tinder, except a Tinder for hats. So this whole thing about the ears was really weird. She says she sees his lobes. Again, she gets into the posture. She said it was weird or sketchy. That's how she described it. Slumped and like kind of folded into himself. And that she says she dips into the second interview and she says, so a portion of your video is missing. Is that what you're telling us? And she's like, yeah, an hour to an hour and a half of that video is missing of my recorded interview. And so she then hands her all of the lawyers have been doing on both sides have been marked. She gives her asks her to mark up a photo of Bridge Guy and on an overview map of the area as to where she saw her. And she starts again, she turns to the jury. She's always like, so when you take this back to the room during deliberations, I want you to starts giving, like, it was the strangest thing. She starts giving instructions to the jury, and Diener's like, oh, ma'am, she's like, please don't do that. So she then says that, she calls them dots of blood down by the legs. She said that, again, sticks with the muddy and bloody, that the coat was dark colored, and that she couldn't see the blood on the coat if there was any, that the sleeves had mud, and that it was really muddy, caked with mud. And at some point, she gets into the third interview. Diener starts leading. Andy makes an objection. And she said that she was like, when she's trying to come up with an explanation in her third interview and why she didn't say mud, she said that she was exhausted. I was exhausted talking about mud. And the officer was very much focused on the blood. So, I was just trying to give the officer what he wanted. And then, so, and like, again, this is where Andy gets up, does a real brief, and like that he goes into that again, talking about the muddy and the bloody. And then again, she says, we're doing this again. This is what we're doing this again. So he's just like, no, we're good. Just sits down. All right. So there were a few jury questions. So she was done. She was something else. What a way to start the day. And she was on for an hour. So she was a long witness for an eyewitness. She was a really, really long witness for an eyewitness. So jury questions, which I always love. What was your age in 2017? She was 26. So she was not a kid. She was, in her 20s. How wide is the road? She says it's 2 lanes, but that it's very, very tight if there's 2 vehicles. So she's like, like you feel uncomfortable. Now I drove down 30 and I felt like it was a normal 2 lane. I didn't feel that I was at all like worried about hitting the car coming opposite our way. So she says, can you describe, so they ask, can you describe how you saw the blood spatter? She's like, I don't know how to say it, but I can tell you that with the blood, that the blood was still in the bright phase. So she's saying, it was really red. That's how I saw it on his jeans. Like she's watching a horror movie or something. That's not what blood looks like when it like the whole thing was just nuts. So the next question, how close were you to the man? And she says 5 feet. So now remember, he's walking on the opposite direction. Now they didn't clarify. I don't know if he's walking in the opposite direction on her side or if he's walking in the opposite direction on the other side. I'm not sure. I don't know definitively. So the final question is, or no, I think Andy says to that question, because the way they work it with the juror questions is they'll ask the question, witness will answer, and then the attorneys get an opportunity to be able to ask questions as well. And then I think Andy asked, "Didn't you testify one of the times that she was, that he was 20 feet away from you?" So, bottom line, she was just incredibly inconsistent all the way through the process. Her her story changed so many times. I don't know what she's bringing to the table, and frankly, with the state's timeline, I'm a little surprised they called her. The state's timeline. Remember, they've got the girls getting killed between 2:30 and 3:30. I mean, I guess 3:56 kind of works for them in that timeline of a guy walking towards town. Maybe, I guess. Like, I mean, I walked that whole like the trail system there. So I mean, theoretically, but I don't know. It's a tough timeline for them to be able to prove. All right, so the second witness, and I got to speed it up. I'm like, I can tell I'm gonna have to come back after Vinny. I'm gonna have to do another live. Oh, I was trying to get like a night where I could just go to sleep early. So Dr. Roland Kohr, Kohr, an older gentleman. I'd guess probably late 60s, early 70s. Semi-retired forensic pathologist. Uh, Very learned. He's been doing it a long time. Teaches. He's an instructor. He's got mad degrees. Very qualified guy. Been doing it forever. He's done, I think, 7,000 autopsies. He said 7 to 8,000 autopsies. So the guy's done an autopsy or two in his time. Um, so then he kind of goes through the process, which I'm gonna blaze through this stuff. Like if you guys probably want those deets, which typically I'll give you, but uh, because I know some people find the whole science behind autopsies really interesting, and I took very diligent notes. And he talks about like when they get the body, what they do when they get it out of the bag. They take notes. He'll always take copious notes as to hair color, eye color, injuries, any trauma. He notes blood on the body, any wounds. It's all documented. He examines the clothing. He examines it for holes, if there's any kind of debris, any kind of evidence on their hairs, fibers, anything like that. Because there's typically always an evidence tech, or at the very least, a law enforcement officer of some variety in the room with them when they're doing this. Uh, Says they'll also look for insect activity. Okay. And at that point, the body is undressed. He'll make notes on the external observation of what he sees prior to washing the body down. Now, in this case, obviously, we know that Libby was unclothed. She obviously had a lot of debris, a lot of mud on her. So he looked at both sides of the body, and before they end up washing the bodies down. And they also check for evidence of SA. And so we can confirm once again that sexual crime evidence kit was used on both girls. Samples were taken, blood samples, fingernail samples, and they took swabs from the cervix, multiple. They did a vaginal flush to see if there was any residue in there. They collected all of it. All of it went into boxes, which are the kits. And so the external examination is wounds, illustrations of wounds, trajectory of wounds, whether or not the wounds look to be left or right, if it's a sharp force instrument. And then he's looking for blood samples. If he finds any, he takes blood samples. He'll take a blood sample from the femoral. And then he's also, then he gets to the external examination. And that's when he starts doing that to see the full extent of the wounds, to see if like organs were pierced, especially if it was a stabbing type injuries. And it gives him a better understanding of the cause of death. It's instructive for them to do that. So they do that by opening the chest cavity and the abdominal cavity. And at that point, they'll also make an incision on the back of the skull. They'll peel the scalp back, and ultimately they're taking the skull cap off in order to examine the brain. Each organ is removed individually. And they're always concerned with making the body presentable post autopsy so that when they're going to be buried, that the body is as intact as it can be and presentable to the families. So then all organs are examined and dissected. Organs are weighed and dissected. They'll take tissue samples. Again, he estimates that he's done somewhere between 7,700 and 7,800. So I was a little off there. So I don't guess. I should just read my notes. Autopsies in his career. He's testified in court on hundreds of occasions in 12 to 15 jurisdictions in Indiana, 4 jurisdictions in Illinois, and I think he did one by Zoom in Montana. He's primarily testified for the prosecution, but he will testify for whoever contacts him saying they need some testimony. So then we look at State's Exhibits 123 through 137. Those were photos taken during the autopsy of both Libby and Abby. He's contacted on 214 to conduct the autopsies on 215, 17. So then we've got a couple of more that were, so 224 and 222 are admitted into evidence, and those are photos of the injuries, close-ups. I think there was a 403 objection by Rosie. He was the one who did the cross on this, and he said that that they're more prejudicial than probative. That they're not giving the jury anything more than anxiety and making them emotional by having to look at the close-ups of the wounds. Over objection, the judge entered them into evidence. So on 215, they perform multiple autopsies. He goes through the process. He's like, it doesn't matter if I'm doing 1 or 4 on a given day. My process is always the same. I complete my worksheet, height, weight, weigh the organs, go back to the office while the case is fresh in mind, make his notes. And then so they autopsied Abby first. Her height was 64 inches, weight 95 pounds. The clothing, she was wearing a black hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, camisole, gray sports bra, no socks. External exam, solitary incised wound to the neck. And then I think he said that it was 5 centimeters in length. And then initial wound, he deemed it to be 2 to 2.5 centimeters wide, and it was the only wound on her neck. So again, he used the assay kit on her, collected swabs vaginally, internally, externally, cervical swab. She was a nail biter. She had very short nails, so there was nothing to collect from under her fingernails. And then all of the evidence was collected and the samples were placed in the box for testing. And he testified that there was no evidence of traumatic sexual assault contact. And then Luttrell, who was doing the direct, asked him, well, that doesn't mean that didn't occur. There's just no evidence that it occurred. And he says, well, that's correct. But I didn't see any evidence of any kind of traumatic sexual contact. And there was no trauma left behind. So he then describes that there's 3 wounds. There's an incised wounds, which are longer than deep. There's a stab wound, which is it's deeper than long. And then a sharp wound, which is something that's done with large knives or axes. There's also lacerations, which are different. Lacerations are not the same thing. There's a tearing of the skin with lacerations, and they are not caused by knives. So the only wound on her body was, in fact, the neck wound. No defensive wounds, no blunt force trauma, no bruising, no ligature. But then he says, well, he's like, there was a very faint ligature mark across her lower face. Now, when they threw the picture up, I could, in fact, see it. It was a very light line that kind of came right below her mouth. And then when they had the picture up, you could see there was something that kind of ran parallel with it that was like on the upper portion under her chin. So he's like, I didn't find any. He's like, it could have been like duct tape, but I didn't find any residue of duct tape. It could have been cloth. I'm not sure what it was. I didn't find any evidence of what it was on her person. So they tried to get into whether or not that looked like that if that was something that was placed over her mouth, was it post-mortem, pre-mortem, or peri-mortem? He ended up landing on peri-mortem, which is kind of in between. So The directionality of the wound, he termed transversal, and he says that it appeared to be right to left. Okay, to her right to left, to Abby's right to left, and there was damage to vessels, whereas to one vessel. And as far as Liberty went, she had damage to the three main vessels: the right carotid artery, the left carotid artery, and jugular vein, which he explained has no muscles in the walls. He was trying to explain kind of how it works. He says that um, the arteries, they carry blood away from the heart, whereas the jugular returns blood to the heart. Okay, so they then get some more exhibits admitted. So 223A for Abby, 223L for Libby, and those are the schematic drawings which they put up on the big screen. And these were so they're not photos, thankfully, because they were like I said, they're schematic drawings that kind of show a throat with no skin. So you're seeing the veins, the arteries, and the muscles. And then he kind of goes through and says that goes through what there was a uh partial transaction of both of the uh carotids, and then there was and he said, in terms of asking him like how deep the cuts were, he said that roughly they went about a half an inch under the skin. It was his guesstimate. He said that the earrings were in place in her ears, um, and that he would term it a gaping wound. And again, he said right to left, but he's not 100% on that. He said that the knife handle, and when you're looking at the wound, he said that it looked like there was a little blunt trauma at the end of the wound, which is what made him think it was right to left, or he thought it might have been the hilt or the handle of the knife that may have caused that little injury. He said that she had a minor abrasion of the lips, and then again, this very faint reddish mark below the mouth and the chin. No residue from any tape found, and or any kind of residue from any kind of cloth or fiber. Does not appear to have her mouth covered. And then she said she was clearly on her back for a period of time because livor mortis had set in, and that the body has to be in that position for at least 8 hours in order for livor mortis to set in, or liver, depending on which forensic pathologist you ask. Werner Spitz would say livor mortis, rigor mortis. Okay, so we then move on to Libby. Height 64 inches, same height as Abby. Weight 200 pounds. Organs placed in a bag. And so he goes back into it. He says, so after they take all the organs out, they do place them back in a bag. They put them in the cavity for when they sew her up. They also did the kit on Libby. There was no evidence visible to the naked eye of trauma. No defensive wounds, no evidence of restraint. Libby had 4 incised wounds to the neck, maybe 5, depending. Her hands were bagged on the picture that we see in order to preserve evidence. The farthest right wound. So then we're looking at the wounds that are terrible to look at, just terrible. There were 2 applications of what weapon was used. So he thought in one of the furthest wound to the right of her neck, he believed that there might have been 2 passes. That there was one pass, they did one pass and then did it again in the same wound, which brought him up to the maybe 5. He said that there was a probable incision on the shoulder, very small, and a minute abrasion below her neck, and there were no other observable injuries. The right side, again, possibly a 2-pass injury. The left is where a lot of damage was done. There's a gaping wound, and there is this thing where there's 5 apparent marks, which originally during his deposition he thought were from a serrated knife potentially. And he says that, and I kind of wrote, like, I drew a really terrible, crude sketch that I posted on Twitter, and people were like, "That sketch is horrible," or something like. I'm like, said it was crude. you want me to do? So at that point, he claims that after the deposition, so this is in 2024 when he's deposed by the defense, he said he was back home in his shop and he was thinking and thinking about these these strange 5 marks that kind of look like this. And I realize it is a terrible picture, but at least it gives you an idea. It's really not that bad. Like, so those 5 marks, so that kind of thing that looks like a pair of lips, that's the gaping wound. And then right above it were those 5 kind of marks. So, and they're abrasions at best. Like, they're not cuts. So it's like almost like if something was like indented. So he's like, what could have left that? And he says, I'm out at my workbench and I see my box cutter. So I'm like, wow. He's like, I think it might have been a box cutter, like the handle of a box cutter. You know, sometimes they'll have plastic handles and they'll have those like plastic notches on them for grip, you know. So he ends up like just flat out saying he thinks it could be a box cutter that caused those injuries. Which fit very nicely into the state's case. So he goes into the symptomatics in terms of Abby obviously felt pain initially, that there would be the fight or flight, that she was bleeding profusely, blood flowing. Heart will try to compensate by pumping more blood. Eventually, you'll lose consciousness, and then eventually you'll expire. He said the range, how long it may have taken her to die, he gave a guesstimate of 5 to 10 minutes. And then same with Abby, observed blood on her hand covering her wound. That's what he assumed it was from, which can slow it down. He estimated that her death could have taken 5 to 10 minutes. He said those are crude estimates, more likely 5 minutes due to the three wounds. He said there was some cerebral edema, which is brain swelling. 1,500 grams is the weight of a normal brain. He says hers was around 1,700 grams. That's like, it's not uncommon to have that with strangling because of the blood loss, but it indicates survival for some period of time. Time of death, determine the time of death. And this is what the news came out and reported incorrectly. He said, this is not a precision estimate that I'm giving you right here. And he said that the condition, so the way that it was asked is that, I think Luttrell said, is the condition of the body is consistent with her having died 40 to 41 hours before the autopsy. And he said, yes. He ends it. Rosie then comes out. All right, I blew it. Like, it took me an hour 3. So I get like, they're going to call me for Skype. You guys are going to be so pissed. Go watch one of the other lives. I'll set up another live. I think I'm only going to be on Vinny for half an hour, and then I'll jump back on because I'm pretty close to, like, I'm just getting started on the cross of Rosie, so it's a good time to take a break. I will start another live. I love all you guys, and I'll be back tonight. Promise. I'm not going to dip on you. But yeah, go watch some other stuff. Everybody that was, please, if you had questions that I did not get to them and you come back to the next live, please ask them again. I will get to them. Thank you for those that have made wonderful donations to me. I'm very appreciative. I love you guys. I'll see you at about 10:05. 10:05 is going to be the time. All right. Ciao.
After